It's April 1968, and I'm 9 years old on a field trip to the Nature Center with my 5th grade class. I have a fairly healthy crush on Mr. Smith, our teacher. He leaves us at the picnic table during our lunch break for a while and comes back crying. He tells us that Dr. King is dead, cut down by a sniper's bullet. My life is changed. Our nation grieves. My tears are hot, but not as hot as the fires burning all over the nation that evening. Grief turns to anger in many hearts. I don't feel angry, but sad and convicted that I'll help America live out the dream of a place where the content of one's character matters more than the color of one's skin. It's April 2007, and I'm the pastor of a church in the East Village of New York City, Middle Church. Our worship celebration has us on our feet with classical music, gospel, and jazz, hymns, brass, and cymbals. Hand clapping and drumming all lift a joyful noise unto our God. There is something for just about everybody there. Baby Mabel is jumping in her daddy's arms. 10-year-old Rebecca is singing at the top of her lungs. The gathered crowd is African American, Hispanic, Korean, Chinese, and all Anglos from England to Australia. We speak English and Spanglish and Mandarin. One of our actors recites James Weldon Johnson's poem, The Creation, to the beat of conga drums. In the poem, God looks at God's handiwork and delights in its goodness. We agree that it is very good. It is sometime in the 1st century, 50 days after Passover, and a huge crowd had gathered in Jerusalem to celebrate a festival called Shavuot. Medes and Parthians and Pamphylians have all come to celebrate the giving of the law to Israel on Mount Sinai. Children run ahead of their parents. Teenagers are huddled in groups, some teasing, some flirting, some struggling to fit in. Older people are being helped along. Some rest on pallets along the way. The crowd is devout and diverse. They speak Greek and Hebrew and Arabic, among other languages. Some are very wealthy. Others have saved a lifetime to make this journey. And then suddenly, as we're told in Acts 2, there's a sound like the rush of a mighty wind. You can almost hear the wind in the Hebrew word ruach, the word for wind, for breath and for spirit. And it was the coming of the Spirit that made the day miraculous. Just like the law was given on Shavuot, the Spirit was given on Pentecost. The Spirit came much like a rush of wind, blowing through that diverse crowd, whispering to some, shouting to others. It seemed like tongues of fire had landed on everyone. Miraculous. But the truer miracle was one of communication and understanding. All of the people gathered heard the good news of God in their own cultural language, in their own language. The Egyptians, the Syrians, the Israelites, the elders heard the good news in a language they recognized, and the young people heard it in their slang. Everybody heard the gospel in a way that they could understand it. This was the birthday of the church, and the very first church was a culturally, racially, economically, and generationally diverse gathering of men and women, boys and girls, who, although incredibly different, heard the same message of God's deeds of power. The Spirit helped the disciples communicate in the languages of all those people. The disciples were multivocal. They built a multivocal bridge of communication. The first church, the multivocal church, the Pentecost paradigm church, was a cooperative, communal, celebrative church. Diversity meant joy and opportunity and surprise and creativity. In that Pentecost paradigm, the people of God were able to be on earth as they expected to be in heaven. They were, in other words, rehearsing the reign of God. That's what happens when the church welcomes and celebrates diversity. There's a sense of having the not yet here, right now, today. And every church, every community has diversity to embrace. It may be that there are different generations to celebrate. In some churches, the diversity is around worship style. Some people like old hymns and others like praise music or gospel singing. Some churches are diverse around ethnicity, with people whose ancestors come from Germany or Africa or Ireland. Others are diverse around what a family looks like. But whatever the diversity God gives us to embrace and celebrate, when we do it, we not only rehearse the reign of God, but we model for the world what it means to be the beloved community. We show in our celebration that each person, created in the image of God, helps the community to see more fully just who God is. I think that is really good news. Now, celebrating the uniqueness of all of God's creation is a really good thing, but it is hard work, really hard work. That's why of the over 300,000 Christian congregations in America, only about 4% of them are intentionally multiracial and multicultural. That's why David Chavez's congregational study shows us that 90% of us worship in congregations in which 90% of the people are just like us. That's why David McAlpin and his colleagues at Fuller Seminary suggested that monocultural churches were the best way to grow the church. Despite the work of so many good people in churches all over the country, 11 o'clock is still the most segregated hour in America. It is work. But if the church does not rehearse the reign of God in our congregations, who will? If those of us who say we love God with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength do not celebrate God's creation in all of its diversity, who will? Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, segregation is the adultery of an illicit intercourse between injustice and immorality. He meant that the church has a moral imperative to create just, beloved communities of diversity. I think he was right. If not us, who? If not now, when? Every time we embrace the other, every time we join together in our differences, we witness to God's goodness. We create what Brian Blunt calls pockets of resistance in a world of fear and suspicion and division. The reign of God breaks in as we rehearse it, one relationship at a time, one church at a time, one community at a time. You may be thinking, oh, okay, we can come together, but then what? Well, here are 3 things that we need to do when we come together. We develop a border consciousness. Catholic priest Virgilio Elizondo helps me to think about life on the border, en la frontera in Spanish, conscious of what it means to be both and. He's both Texan and Mexican. I'm both African and American. Many of us are both privileged and not privileged. When we think of the ways we are both and, we realize that we're other to someone else. The sense of our own otherness helps us to know what it's like to walk in the shoes of those who are disenfranchised or dismissed because of who they are. We build an empathy when we can ask, when did I feel left out? When did I feel power down? We sense in the other's sufferings our own suffering, and together we're stronger. Our sense of being the stranger helps us to welcome the other. We bear one another's burdens, and they're lighter. A border consciousness builds empathy, and that's what's necessary in diverse communities. We need to learn some new languages. We need to become multivocal. We need to be conversant in the language of the other. We need to become culturally competent and multivocal. We might need to learn Spanish in this country, or Mandarin, or even English, but I'm not just talking about those kinds of languages. We need to learn the cultural language of the stranger in the midst of us. We need to learn the ways young people talk, listen to their music, read their magazines, watch MTV and BET. Be a student of their culture and listen and learn. We need to break bread together so we can know each other's foods and rituals. We need to get deep, go naked, and come clean. I wonder about how this might sound to you, but I really mean it. If we're going to be in diverse communities, if we're going to rehearse the reign of God, we need to come down off the surface and go deep. Get real, be honest, show ourselves, and be willing to take the risk of being seen. Receive the other for who they are. Make a safe space for sharing, talking, listening, and struggling. We need to confess together the way fears and suspicion of difference shape our life in America. To undo those fears, we need to share our stories and listen to others, and let that sharing change us. We're transformed in relationships with each other if we're open and vulnerable and real. If we can tell the truth, we can grow, fall down, fuss, get up, be changed, and change the world. The first church was a wonderful gathering of unique people, each filled with God's breath. Today, the church can witness to the magnificence of God's creation if we just go back to the beginning, our roots. The Spirit came and everyone heard the good news in their own language. Our coming together in difference, our celebration of each other is a Spirit-filled miracle. We need that miracle. The world needs that miracle. Amen.